When I heard that we were lucky enough to have our guest from NPR be with us tonight, I really couldn't believe it. I don't know how she found time in her schedule to start with, but I have similarly been listening to her, as I'm sure most of you all have, for many years, and how to take that body of work and condense it into something meaningful that won't mean that we'll still be here talking about her and her accomplishments at 8:30 is very difficult. As NPR's senior national correspondent, Linda Wertheimer travels the country and the globe for NPR News. Not particularly surprising. A respected leader in U.S. media, and as we all know, a beloved figure to listeners who have followed her 3-decade-long NPR career, she provides clear-eyed analysis and thoughtful reporting on all NPR News programs. Before taking the national correspondent post, she spent 13 years as host of NPR's flagship news magazine, All Things Considered. There's a theme here this afternoon. We're focusing on our 12 to 7 period, and here's part of the theme. As host, she helped build the afternoon news program audience to absolutely record levels. The show grew from 6 million listeners in 1989 to nearly 10 million listeners by the spring of 2001, making it one of the top 5 shows in U.S. radio. Her influence on All Things Considered, and by extension all of public radio, has been absolutely profound. From 74 to 89, she provided the highly praised and award-winning coverage of national politics and Congress for NPR. In 76, she became the first woman to anchor network coverage of a presidential nomination convention of election night. Over her career at NPR, she has anchored 10 presidential nomination conventions and 12 election nights. She is the first person to broadcast live from inside the U.S. Senate chamber. Her 37 days of live coverage of the Senate Panama Canal Treaty debates won her a special Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University Award. In '95, she shared in an Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University Silver Baton Award given to NPR for its coverage of the first 100 days of the 104th Congress, the period that followed the 1994 Republican takeover of Congress. She has received too many other journalism awards to name tonight, but including one from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and let me tell you, those folks take this very seriously. She was named in 1997 as one of the top 50 journalists in Washington by Washingtonian magazine, and in 1998 as one of America's 200 most influential women by Vanity Fair. Here's something you probably didn't know. Prior to joining NPR, she worked for the British Broadcasting Corporation in London and for WCBS Radio in New York. Her 1995 book, Listening to America, 25 Years in the Life of a Nation is Heard on National Public Radio, published by Houghton Mifflin, celebrates NPR's history. Will you please join me in a warm Atlanta welcome for Linda Wertheimer.
Thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Stop. This is, I'll put this up here so that since you've never seen me before, you can keep track. Maybe it'll stay, there it is. Thank you all very much. It's very kind of you. I appreciate the opportunity to come to Atlanta and help you celebrate WABE. I think it's a real tribute to the station that in a down economy, there are so many people who are willing to turn up, and I assume also be regular givers to the station. So this is it's very impressive, and I really think you all are doing wonderful things for NPR as well as for WABE, and we're all grateful for your help. I would very much appreciate the kindness of John and Rennie, and It really is fun for me. I ran into Michael Fields, practically the first person I saw. You know, it was an old friend from NPR, which is also great. And congratulations to Denis and John on your new responsibilities. This is great. You know, we at NPR, we hate the local hosts. Because they just step all over what what we all thought we were saying. But I'm trying to be nice about it. I mean, it depends, of course, upon the station. I mean, there are some stations in our network where, they have no idea who I am because they never hear me. But we have a, love-hate relationship with the stations because it is imperative that, that the stations be strong, because if they're not strong, we won't be, and if we're not, they won't be. It's a strong relationship, I think, especially the big stations like this one, which reach so many people every day. So it's fabulous. Anyway, I just want to say that the economy is obviously hit very hard in the nonprofit world. I mean, it's hit the whole country, of course, but for us, all of our nonprofit, the nonprofit institutions, which have always been a part of the way we fund National Public Radio and stations like WABE, they are falling on hard times because of their endowments, their investments are not providing the sort of income that they need to. Actually, there have been a couple of, as I'm sure you've all read, there have been a couple of foundations that have just simply died in this economy. A couple of them killed off by Mr. Madoff, sadly. And of course, our for-profit benefactors are suffering and are not able to do for us what they have always been able to do. National Public Radio, like public broadcasting generally, has had very strong support from the automobile industry and from the financial industry, just to name two, who are having some difficulty. But even when you are blessed with endowments, as National Public Radio is, a few years ago, we inherited part of the estate of Joan Kroc, who inherited from her, whoops, I dropped my pen, who inherited from her, well, it's gone. No. Thank you. Who inherited from the late, great Ray Kroc of McDonald's many, many millions of dollars, and she left us a substantial amount of money, which is the NPR endowment. It was added to the NPR endowment. And there too, I mean, that's the kind of thing that it's like the bulwark between us and the really bad things that could happen to us. But it too, is not earning what it has in the past. We have had, I've always said that public radio generally is standing, most of the time, standing on the edge of the precipice. Sometimes we're, like hanging down into the precipice. But most of the time we're standing on the top. And the crock pot, as we think of our gift, has enabled us to back up about a step and a half from the edge. So it's been a great thing. Now, I just would like to say that it is a wonderful thing that we are on the ground floor of this building, because I'm going to talk about the economy a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about international relationships a little bit. And I'm just glad to think that if anybody wants to jump, that they won't really be hurt very badly, because in the last few days, the American people have found finally a way to really express their upset at the way the economy is going, and that is at AIG. And as you know, there are demonstrations planned for Thursday, which is my birthday. So, it'll be all these people are going to come out in the street, probably not because of me, but I'll claim it. But this company, which was part an insurer and part a trader in various kinds of financial instruments, which they invented and no one can understand, was considered to be too huge to fail. And then the last administration started this bailout process, and President Obama is now having a lot of difficulty trying to, to handle the public reaction to the fact that AIG has decided to go ahead and pay bonuses. I suppose, there is some sort of rather morbid entertainment value in watching the masters of the universe turn into the scum of the earth. But it is, I think it's limited entertainment value. But of course, there will be consequences to the way that corporate America has been misbehaving. And I think that one of the most interesting things is, is trying to sort of think about what those consequences might be. And that's the kind of thing that, we try very hard to do at NPR. We try to sort of, move on to the next step if we can. But I do think that all of this anger at AIG, is this feeding back? Do I need to move the microphone up?
I'm on your lavalier microphone.
Oh, okay. So I can move this thing? All right. That's good. Maybe that's what's feeding back. I think that one of the interesting things that is going to happen here is that the public attitude toward what has happened at AIG, the very serious public anger, which has been expressed over the last few days, I think that will create an atmosphere in which more sweeping regulation can be, and I assume will be, created to take care of, to sort of get a handle on what is happening to the financial industry. You might even think that trust busters are back in style. And it's going to be an interesting thing. And one of the most interesting things, I think, is that the carrying on in Congress, in response, of course, to what the people, their voters, are saying, has been so extreme that I think that they're in a place now that's going to be tough to back off of. I think there is a real possibility too that future federal rescues, which I think will happen, will be so hemmed in by rules and regs that it's going to be, they will be so severe a rescue as to even feel kind of vindictive, I think, to some of the companies that are having to, are forced, I think, in many cases, to accept the federal funds. This is a serious case, I think, of being careful what you wish for, because I would not have thought that after all of the years, really feeling very strongly since the Reagan administration that, that markets rule and that we cannot, that markets will correct, all of those things which we are now afraid may not be true after all, has created an atmosphere and a possibility for what may be an overcorrection in the opposite direction. So these are things I think that would be interesting to watch for. And I think that we all, as we watch what is happening in the news, it's always useful to try to figure out what is being set in motion by what is going on here. Now, it's obviously put a few dents in the new president, this AIG business especially, which is one reason why he has lately been talking about the previous president, who set this all in motion. I mean, all in motion, I think. One of the things that was fabulously interesting to me in traveling around the country, talking to people, because what I spend my time doing in an election year is no longer traveling with candidates, thank the Lord. I mean, I cannot tell you the charm of listening to the same speech 5 times a day. It's just, we used to stand behind the bleachers at, at an event, behind the camera stand sometimes, and just speak Jimmy Carter's speech along with him. I mean, if the man had ever had laryngitis, any number of people on his campaign bus would have been able to just get up there and make the speech. He could move his mouth, you know, and we could talk. Would have been a kind of an interesting thing to do. But I think that what I have been doing is talking to voters. Now, this is not just, you know, like wander into a mall and stop 6 people kind of talking to voters. What this is thinking, thinking and consulting with people like Andy Kohut of the Pew Center for the People in the Press, whose poll I so strongly urge you to you know, kind of keep an eye on. He has a wonderful website. But Andy, you know, I consult with Andy about what's a group that it's important to be talking to now. Young people, old people, white people, black people, who should we be looking at? And then we go trying to find a representative group, and we go to a place that will be important. So we set ourselves up to have a meaningful conversation with voters, and then the voters, essentially what usually happens is that voters will talk about what the polls have been saying they're talking about, but they will tell us why they feel that way. They'll tell us how strongly they feel. And they will tell it to us in ways that, you know, you hardly ever read in a poll. We were up in Wisconsin in a town called Bloomer, which I really recommend to you if you happen to ever to be in western Wisconsin and sort of on your way to the Boundary Waters. In Bloomer, there's this pie shop which has really remarkably good pie. We went in there, and there was a group of old men sitting, they weren't all old. 2 of them are really old, and the other 2 were probably younger than me. Sitting in a corner booth. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, and they were playing euchre. And so we watched for a while, and somebody would get up and somebody else would sit down. You know, it's sort of a movable feast. But when we talked to the people at the table, there was a father and his 2 sons and one of the father's buddies. And the 2 sons told us that they were going to vote. They were not going to vote Republican ever again. They had voted for Reagan twice, they voted for George Bush twice, and they voted for George Bush II twice. And they had had it with the Republican Party forever. And so one of them said that he was going to vote for Hillary Clinton because he thought she was, you know, sort of on the conservative side. I mean, she was not a crazy person. He liked her regular kind of way of looking at things. And the other one said, I just can't vote for Hillary Clinton. And I said, oh, but you're going to vote for a Democrat. He said, I can't vote for a Republican. And I said, that leaves Barack Obama. And he said, yes, it does. I asked his father what he was going to do, and he said, well, I go back and forth. I can't decide. Today, he said, I'm voting for the black boy. Now, you know, I go back and I call my boss, and I said, we've got this really very, you know, I mean, this is a man who is about to do something that would be completely unimaginable to him just even a few years ago. And he's going to do it. And he's determined he's doing it. And I said, so I think we should put it on the radio. And my boss said, well, we have to have some sensitivity meetings. So I said, okay, let me know how it comes out. And he went away. He called me back and he said, I have met, I think, 42 different people. And he said, some of them I've never seen before in my life. But they decided that if we sort of put it in the right context, that we could use this comment without, you know, being horribly offensive. Although it's good to be offensive every once in a while, you know, just so you can be sure that people out there are awake. And we filed this piece because it was demonstrating for us that the American people had such an appetite for change. They were so determined to have change. They were so concerned about the state of the economy, which of course became much more apparent to people in the heartland early than it did in Washington. And I think that You know, that's the kind of thing that we try to do in order to sort of help to understand, you know, what is going on. And I think that it is true, that there is a tremendous appetite for change. And there is an appetite for a sort of big course correction. Now, I don't know how it comes out. You know, I think that this is one of those moments where, you know, please God, we have the wisdom to use the, you know, the taxpayer funds that are being poured back into the economy with even a particle of the wisdom that created things like the GI Bill. But it is, you know, I think it's a moment like that. It's a time like that. And that makes it a very, very interesting time. The other thing that I'm keeping an eye on in the economy that's, you know, apart from just sort of the general, can't stand to watch those graphs, you know, you can't do that every day. It's a real blessing to be on the radio, so you don't have to show pictures of the horrible graphs. The next very difficult task for the feds is going to be how to get these rotten assets off the bank's books and into some sort of form where they can figure out what to do with them. You know, should they be sold? Should they be, what should happen? Can they put something together which will operate sort of like the Resolution Trust Corporation of loving memory did, where a lot of people actually managed to make some money out of dead savings and loans. And nobody really knows what it's going to be, but something has to be done to get this stuff out, to take out the trash, so that people can start borrowing money again and money can start to move in a regulated sort of way, of course. Now, my personal favorite idea, for reasons that have nothing to do with the merits of the idea, is that they should create one bank and put all the nasty stuff in it. And then I start trying to think, you know, what will we call it? Which I think is a really interesting idea. Now, we had, I proposed a name for it, which I'm not going to repeat, and Steve Inskeep made an acronym out of it. And then both of us were just very upset, very sad, because we couldn't put it on the radio. We thought it was quite good. Along with our own economy, the United States being the most powerful and vibrant economy in the world, as politicians are always telling us, is taking the economies of the rest of the world down with us, which is very destabilizing and very dangerous. But that is, I think, not the biggest problem that the president faces overseas. Secretary Madeleine Albright, I saw her, I've seen her a couple times recently, and she actually says out loud that the world is in the worst shape that she has ever seen it since the Great War. I mean, since the World War. There are two hot wars going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, as you know, which have raised up the specter of an increasingly influential Iran and an increasingly unstable Pakistan. Two countries which are, you know, scare the pants off you just to think about what they might do. Pakistan especially, Secretary Albright reckons, is one of the most dangerous places in the world these days. Our efforts, you know, our single biggest effort in terms of international relations is to fight terror. And unfortunately, our efforts to fight terrorism in a unilateral sort of way have tended to increase it. I mean, we bomb civilians on the borders of Pakistan and create more terrorists. On the other hand, we have no choice but to move against the forces that are gathering on the borders of Pakistan, because they're extremely dangerous to us. As bad and scary as the Cold War was, it was at least a standoff between nations. I mean, it was organized. You knew who to talk to, and perhaps more to the point, you knew where they were. I think that that's one of the things that makes this whole thing so upsetting. There are no structures, no protocols. There's no mutual assurance of anything in the dangerous parts of the world now. We're looking at non-state actors. and the most, of course, amazing one being Al-Qaeda. There's a constant fear, of course, that they will acquire really terrible nuclear weapons, which we have not managed to control. Our previous president made a lot of decisions about what he was not going to do based on the president previous to him. Did not continue talks on nuclear controls, did not continue talks with Korea, and did not continue sending a special person to deal with the Israelis and the Palestinians. The new president and the new Secretary of State are trying to get that kind of activity up and running again, which is a difficulty. Basically, I think we're in a mess, which makes me think that this is, and this is another one of the things that was striking in talking to voters. One of the things that people said to me over and over again, it could have been anybody, a guy running a bulldozer, a guy who's selling tickets to the movie theater, a person who was a college professor, up and down the social and educational and economic ladder, people were saying the United States is not respected in the world, and they all want it back. They want that. They want the responsible role the United States has played in the past. They want that back. And I think that is, that is one of the sort of the big hopes that people are placing in Barack Obama. And it is, there again, there is a strong sense of that voters were voting mindfully, purposefully to get some of those kinds of things, those problems handled by this new president, and with as untried and untested as any president could possibly be, I think. So we are living in a time when extraordinary things are happening, and we need to know a lot about what's going on. And I think that it's a tribute to your commitment to your community and your commitment to what is happening in the world, to understanding what is happening in the world, that you've been, thank you very much, that you've been so generous with WABE. And I think it could not be more important. I don't know if you saw the story this morning in the paper that the Post-Intelligencer in Seattle is closing. And it's the first big city paper to go under in a long time, and it's not going to be the last. I mean, there's every reason to believe that even the New York Times may not make it. Time magazine thinks that they can survive. Newsweek thinks they cannot. These sources of news are just fading before whatever it is that the internet is doing. I'm too old to, worry about it, the internet, but I do worry about the news. And I appreciate very much the fact that you were all here and that you were all involving yourself in what I think is one of the strongest news gathering operations that is left in the United States. National Public Radio has reporters in many countries. We have reporters all over the country, this country. We constantly are reporting from hotspots. We are trying to show up and see clearly and say what we saw all over the world. And the fact that you are helping to preserve that possibility is tremendous, and I salute you for it. And thank you very much.
We wanted to extend this opportunity a bit tonight to offer you all the opportunity to ask questions from the audience of Linda, Denis, John, whomever you feel appropriate and interested in.
We are not entitled by our bylaws to, to sort of rat hole a lot of money. So what we have done, we spend it. And that's one of the things that we spend it on people mostly. And I think that that's one of the most interesting things about trying to figure out what is the news organization of the future. And it may be that not-for-profit, a not-for-profit model like National Public Radio could be translated into other areas. I'm not sure about that. You know, I don't know enough about the business side of anything to, you know, of how the newspaper business works. But you know, that it's by no means comfortable, but on the other hand, it has been workable for the last, you know, since 1971. Well, I think they're talking about everything that they can. I mean, there are all sorts of, the Poynter Institute in Florida, the Shorenstein Center at Harvard, all the Annenberg Center in California, all of these organizations that sort of think about the news and think about news organizations are, you know, I think they're talking of little else, I got to tell you, than what is going to happen with newspapers. And of course, what is completely terrifying is what is going to happen without them. Well, there certainly is a big argument to be made about that, that confidence and optimism drives the recovery. And that, you know, maybe if, as you say, if you just have too many uncomfortable facts rattling around in your head, you might not feel all that optimistic and confident and go out and buy a washer dryer or a car or whatever it is that we need to do. What do you think?
I certainly would like to take that one on, because as somebody who reports on politics here and the economy here, we all know what's happened. It really has been sort of depressing, not just to listen to it, but to put it together. And this is where, I mean, I have always believed that, and particularly with the NPR audience, what we are doing is communication, and communication is back and forth. And that means that everyone who is a consumer of news, at some point, yeah, it is possible to know too much. And what all of us in the media, commercial and public, have tried to do is to make it as accessible and as easy as possible, which means that you can sit there for a long time. I mean, I remember after the attack on the World Trade Center, I was at the state capitol covering reaction to that, and I talked to my wife Lisa on the phone, and she was like, I can't turn it off. And I said, turn it off. Not permanently, but life is a cycle. It is more than one thing, even the most horrible things. And to know about them and to know about them in depth is why we're here. But we're also here to say, you know, we report on what happens in your world and our world together. And it really is what happens not just in the halls of Congress and not just in the halls of the state capitol, but out in the world where we all live when we're not watching the news or listening to the news. And I think finding that balance is an individual call, but it is up to the person, each person who's watching or listening, and then sending what you think back to us who try our best to tell you the stories.
I would say that that traveling around the country and talking to people is a very inspiring thing to do, because one of the things that that you find, you know, is how insightful and how thoughtful people are, and all kinds of people are, and I found that to be. You know, every time I thought that the country was sort of appeared to be headed off a cliff, I'd find you know, people who would tell me who could just like see it, they understood it, and I felt much more comfortable with the notion that these were people who were going to go out and they were going to vote and they were going to, you know, they were going to make some decisions, and that they were making them. They were very capable of making those decisions. I mean, I've always believed whenever we have elected a president that I, for one reason or another, thought was maybe like not the best guy I ever could have imagined in the job, I have always believed that the American people made that decision from a position of strength. I mean, they made that position because, say, for example, the other guy was just not, they just couldn't deal with the other guy. Or maybe this person wasn't the best sort of choice, but they saw something in him. You know, and they're almost always right. I think they've almost always been right. So, you know, I feel comfortable with that.
I ran into that, and it was interesting you were talking about Wisconsin. My wife Lisa is from a little town in Indiana, and her family began in an even littler town in Nebraska. And we spent a good bit of time this summer and fall in both places, the first time she'd ever seen where her family started. And I would just go in and talk to people in the little diner or the little convenience store and just sit and talk to them because the campaign was going on. And I never, particularly in Nebraska, these were farmers who were having a terrible time with their crops. They'd had drought for years. The prices had fallen just as they were starting to get some rain back. And yet they were convinced, first of all, that they were living in the best place they could possibly live. And secondly, that they would find their way through it. And I think they're right.
I have been so amazed in the 3.5 years since I hosted a classical program. A big change that has happened for music listeners. It seems that they, more than I imagined, are reaching out for companionship at a time when, sure, there's some bright light on the horizon, but it's also a really uncertain time. People are not really sure what's coming next. And they like a little bit of music. They like the companionship in the afternoon. And in the 3.5 years since I hosted a classical program, it's amazing how just as soon as I opened up that mic, started talking, the emails started coming in, and not necessarily just asking questions about music, but you could tell they were looking to connect with someone. And that's another thing that I think public radio offers that not every medium can, and that is a human on the other side of the mic that's there with you, may not be there in person, but there with you through these times no matter what happens. And we hope to remain there as well.
There are cable television, you know, the competition of cable television has created some moments where you begin to think that everything is breaking news, for example. There'll be, it's raining, breaking news.
Let's break the good stuff. Let's sensationalize the positive so this whole thing turns around.
But I'm a great believer that you don't want to make it into something that it isn't in either direction. You don't want to leave stuff out. You want to be sure that people have everything, that you tell them everything that you know. And so that's what we try to do. I mean, NPR has a very different tone, and most of our stations, I think, are very similar in that way. A very different tone from much of commercial broadcasting. And when you're out there fiddling around on the dial, when you're not in your own hometown, you can easily find that station just because of the way it sounds. Now, I think, cable television has a lot. There's a lot of interesting moments in cable television, but it's more entertaining than information often. But I mean, how could we would not have wanted to miss Jon Stewart versus Jim Cramer. That was great stuff.
When I was making my goodbyes at Channel 11, Donna Lowry, our education reporter there, who's a wonderful person, came up to me and said, where will I be able to hear John's Stargazer thing? And I said, I'm sure John will find a home for it. And, but she said almost the same thing you did, that she wishes she could hear it several times a day. So you have a very smart and avid compatriot in Donna Lowry.
If only the stars and planets would move a little faster, maybe I could do hourly updates, you know.
I'm not sure that we added too much to that particular confrontation, apart from, you know, telling people where they could watch it. It was on our website, I think. You know, it's a fabulous thing to do, what Jon Stewart does, and I wish we had done it. You know, in which where he went through hours and hours of broadcasts and picked out these loony recommendations, you know, which were just over and over again wrong, and just sort of called him on it. It's a fascinating, you know, it was a fascinating exercise, and I think that, you know, that was. I don't actually think Jon Stewart does news, even though lots of young people, to my horror, think that he's the best source of news they know. but he really nailed that one, I thought. Oh, you mean well, of course, what we don't sell in the way that Kramer did. No. Is that what you mean? No. Well, you know, I think that the person, you know, John Itzdy is one of our principal business correspondents. I don't know if you've ever seen John, but John is Norwegian through and through. He's from, you know, he's from Minnesota, and he doesn't get excited about much. So I would say that our business coverage has been very, you know, kind of straight down the road, because John has done most of it. But we have launched a new program in cooperation with Ira Glass and called Planet Money. Planet Money is a blog, it's a podcast, and it finds its way onto the radio all the time. It's very lively radio. But I really recommend that it's one of the best bits of business coverage that we've done in a very long time. I mean, I think we've been solid, very solid with our business coverage, but Planet Money, you know, just takes off in a kind of a quirky way that is fabulous to listen to.
I had one quick thought on Jon Stewart and the Jon Stewart Kramer thing. As I was watching that, and I was watching it as it was airing for the first time, I was thinking, you know, not in terms of Jon Stewart, Comedy Central host, versus Jim Kramer, CNBC guy. I mean, there were all of those. That was all. I tried to sort of sweep that out of my head and just look at it as person A, reporter A, asking questions of person B. And I thought, you know, you could do worse in a journalism school than to have somebody look at that interview, not for, you know, get the financial guy, not for anything ideological, but just for the pursuing of a line of questioning and keeping the important stuff up front.
Well, you know, a man named Mark Talisman, who he's quoted all the time on, you know, on the Israeli side of Palestinian-Israeli issues. Mark Talisman said to me one day, he said, "Are the bits of music that are played after the pieces meant to be some sort of comment on the pieces?" And I said, "Well, sometimes they are." And he said, "I'm tone deaf, and I hate that." But some of them are really very clever, some of the things they do. Yes. And my knowledge of music is just limited to that's good music and that's not good music. But some of those choices, I think, are just really inspired. And then there are things that go on and that you may not be aware of, like, for example, if a musician dies, and we have not, we just sort of mention it in the news, but we don't do a full-fledged obituary, almost every piece of music in the program will be something related to that person, as a kind of an obituary from the director of the program who, who puts the music in. And then we have on Morning Edition, one of the people who picks the music is is sort of an old rocker. And he, at the moment, he is totally in love with a band called Los Straitjackets. And they play kind of, I don't know, sort of salsa-ish rock and roll. And it's really great music. It's really fun to listen to. And he's been, I think what he's been trying to do is saying, don't jump out the window. Rock with me here.
It's almost like the whole best laid plans of mice and men. We put all this thought, blood, sweat, and tears into programming pieces of music during the course of the workday. And what are the pieces that people call about? They're the little pieces of fill that we use at the end of the program, or that you hear during Morning Edition and All Things Considered. Thank heavens, All Songs Considered came along.
Yeah, it's all on the website. You can find it out if you want to see, if you want to know.
A wonderful website, a spectacular.
We're also working on the architecture of the website to make it easier. Well, we certainly try. We do try to sort of call people in and interview them, and the reporters do it as well. But one of the things about a really abstruse topic, just your brain turns to mush trying to describe what some of these, the sliced and diced financial instruments that we've been hearing so much about. I think that's one of the reasons why people do turn to their business correspondents, because they have made a hideously difficult effort to try to get it into something simple. But it is never impossible to talk. There's nothing that you can't talk about on the radio if you just think hard enough about how to make it comprehensible. You think about Nina Totenberg and all of her very complicated legal decisions that she explains with her item. She does these bullet points on the radio. It's not easy. No one else would even attempt it. And talking about banking, talking about finance has been very difficult. Well, the classic thing that people say about the American people and their reaction to Congress is that they will tell you that they think the Congress is a bunch of crooks. They're all the same, blah, blah, blah. They're really very negative about the Congress. When you ask them about their guy, or woman as the case may be, they will tell you that they think is a pretty good guy. And we got my cousin's kid into West Point, and he could not have been more helpful, all that kind of thing. So, people who do good constituent service, people general, and you hardly ever meet a politician who is just a repellent person, Most of them have some charm. And so people tend to like their individual guy, but they don't like the group. And I sometimes ask them, I said, look, what do you think? You could be, just knock them out. What would happen if you want to get politicians' attention? What you have to do is indicate to them that they could lose. The easiest and most simple way to do that without actually, defeating a guy you really like is to go out and vote for somebody else in the primary. People who are used to winning their seats by 65% are totally freaked out if they lose 5 or 6 points in a primary. And not lose by those points, but just, if they don't win by as much as they imagine they're going to. But at some point, roughly every 20 years, people get so annoyed that they vote against people they like perfectly well.
Just a quick addition to that. We see that here in Georgia, where Saxby Chambliss just ran for re-election, and although this state went for John McCain, Senator Chambliss had some uneasy moments, I can tell you, because I covered that campaign. And that brings up 2 points that Ms. Wertheimer was talking about earlier. One was the extent of the reforms that we might see in the financial system coming out of Congress, thinking that they may actually be quite draconian, and depending on the reaction from Republican voters in particular, they may or may not be. But what happened here in Georgia in that election that would never die, that stretched into December, was important, because with Chambliss, particularly if Al Franken is seated in Minnesota, the Democrats have one fewer vote than they need for cloture. Now, when it comes to the financial issues, it's going to be a little tough, because those kind of cross party lines in ways that you can't just say, oh, well, the Republicans won't have enough votes. But it was important. It was significant in a lot of ways. And the Democrats who are watching people who said, I voted Republican all my life, I'll never vote for a Republican again, had best be careful, because you never say never in politics. And the way that this Congress conducts itself, and we're starting to see it a little bit already, will not just produce a reaction among voters about them, it will produce a reaction among voters about President Obama. And that's a real tightrope that they will all have to walk. And what happened here was one little piece of that puzzle.
Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.